And so in 1792, the British Prime Minister, Pitt, reduced British military expenditure. Pitt's government was determined to be a reformist government. Pitt wanted to remake Britain, in particular, to ban the slave trade, to reform the British economy. They didn't want to be dragged into European entanglements. And so Pitt starts by reducing British military expenditure. In the east, Prussia, Russia, and Austria carve up Poland between them. It disappears from the map. But with the start of the revolution, Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Spain all declare war on France. Why? Well, as counter-revolutionary forces start to gather, they're determined to stamp down on the revolution and reimpose the monarchy onto France. And so counter-revolutionary forces cross the border, but they move hesitantly. This is a time when you don't have armies used to sweeping across vast areas of Europe. They're worried about supply, and they're worried about keeping close to their bases, and so they're very hesitant at crossing the border. And a French army beats the Prussian forces at the Battle of Valmy. The French then win a series of battles along their border with the Holy Roman Empire in the Rhineland, and they start to then drive back the counter-revolutionary forces, threatening the Netherlands, Italy, and the German states. And in this year, King Louis XVI of France is executed. And from 1793 to 95, you have the first coalition against France. France responds to being attacked by its neighbours with what they call a levy en masse, a conscription. France forms a conscript army of 400,000 men, compared to the British army of 38,000. So a huge army for this time period. The coalition, however, fights in the old gentlemanly manner. This is an incredible era, actually, that had just come to the end in warfare. Mankind really believed that mankind was getting too civilized to fight a war, and that they looked forward to the future when man would have evolved beyond the need for warfare. And so, just before the Napoleonic Wars, if you were on a battlefield and you put your weapon down, you were allowed to go without any further problems. There had been some real oddities in warfare, including armies sending men home because they didn't want to outnumber their opponent. I mean, it wasn't always like this, obviously. It's important that we don't look at it as a golden age, but there were hopes that warfare could be codified and controlled and rendered gentlemanly. The coalition fights in this old-fashioned way. The French are fighting to win, and to win at all costs. And also the coalition is distracted. So Russia focuses on crushing the Poles, watched by 60,000 Austrian troops and a large Prussian army. They don't believe that the revolutionary forces can fight. They think that they'll soon crumble before the royalist armies that are sent their way. And so Poland disappears completely from the map by 1795. Whereas the British are also distracted. The British know that a European war is important to fight it globally, and they're determined to take as much of the French Empire as they can while there's this window of opportunity. And so from 1793 to 6, the British attack the French West Indies Empire, with 40,000 dead and 40,000 wounded, mostly by disease. And they set up a blockade while sending money to help their European allies. This is the way the British like to fight a war. Seize enemy empires and colonies, starve an economy into submission, use British financial power to fund European armies so that the Europeans can do the dying for the British. And so, the First Coalition War continues. And in 1793, the French declare war on the Netherlands. The British send the Duke of York with a small army out to help the Dutch, but it's a weak and inexperienced force that ultimately achieves nothing, hence the nursery rhyme about the grand old Duke of York. In 1795, Prussia abandons fighting on the west bank of the Rhine, and the German states, thinking they're being abandoned by the Prussians, declare neutrality in the war between Prussia and France. The French forces by now have conquered the Dutch Republic and renamed it the Batavian Republic. And at the end of 2 years of war, the Basel Peace Treaty is signed. Prussia signs a peace with France. The Netherlands has been conquered by the French, and Spain decides that now's the appropriate time to change sides and to ally with France against its enemies. And so the French, Spanish fight against the British and Austrians. As state after state has fallen out of the war. Prussia has made peace with France, the Dutch have been conquered, Spain has changed sides, and so now the war of the First Coalition has devolved down to France and Spain against Britain and Austria. The French, determined to defeat the Austrians, invade Italy to drive the Austrians out. And this army is led, for the first time I suppose coming into our history, the French army is led by a man called Napoleon, who's not in charge of France, he's in charge of what is one of many French armies, the one driving into northern Italy. In 1796, the kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont, one of the big kingdoms of northern Italy, is conquered by the French. And in 1797, the Austrians are driven out of Italy. Italy is not an independent country at this time. Britain's got a lot of different Italian states dominated by the Austrians, while the Austrians by 1797 have been driven out of Italy by the French. And the Peace of Campio Formio is signed in October 1797. Austria has made peace with the French, and the British are left alone. The Spanish and Dutch fleets start to attack the British fleet, but the Spanish fleet is beaten soundly at the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, and the Dutch fleet is beaten at the Battle of Camperdown. The British then seize the Spanish, French, and Dutch empires, especially in the East and West Indies, Colombo in what's now Sri Lanka, Malacca, and South Africa, and the Cape of Good Hope, as the British start to seize all of the European empires that they can. And so the war has become very simple. The French are dominant on the continent of Europe. The British control the seas and have taken every empires. Now, with the war dragging on, the war has become increasingly expensive for the British, and so the British government introduced for the first time an income tax to fund the war, and they promised that as soon as the Napoleonic Wars are over, the income tax will be scrapped. So that's something for us all to look forward to here in Britain. As soon as victory is achieved, that income tax will go. I'm sure they won't back down on that promise. Now, in 1798, French troops are sent to Ireland to try and undermine the British, but are repulsed. And a French army is sent to Egypt, led by Napoleon, with 31,000 men. Their idea is, now there's no Suez Canal at this time period, remember, so you can't sail from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and on to India, but they know that the wealth of Britain comes from its Indian Empire, and so their plan is simple. Send an army to Egypt, conquer Egypt, build a fleet, and then sail to India or march on India to break British financial power. And so Napoleon invades Egypt with 31,000 men. Now, the British don't own Egypt at this stage. It's part of the Ottoman Empire. And by 1799, Napoleon will be in control of the French war effort. But at the moment, he's still a rising general. He's now famous for his brilliant Italian campaign. Napoleon's invasion of Italy against the Austrians had been a superb military campaign, and his invasion of Egypt, again, will be very well handled by himself. He brings with him a lot of historians and archaeologists. It's when they find the Rosetta Stone it's the French Army of Occupation in Egypt. Now, so from 1798 to 1800, you have the war of the Second Coalition against France. Britain uses its financial power to start bringing European states back into its war against the French. And so Britain, Austria, Russia, the Ottoman Turks, Portugal, and Naples will be at war now with France, Spain, and the occupied Dutch. The British seize the islands of Minorca and Malta to help them with their naval control of the Mediterranean, and Austrian and Russian armies are sent into Europe to invade France.